Hey everyone, I'm Erin Autin, Director of Research Programs at Zpryme, and I'm here today with my colleague at Zpryme, Erin Hardick, who is our lead research analyst, and Jennifer Sanders, who is the Executive Director of the Dallas Innovation Alliance. Thanks for joining us today, Jen. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing great. Excited to be speaking with you today. So Jennifer, you do a lot of work in Dallas around different city and community initiatives, one of them being transportation and mobility. How has this pandemic highlighted mobility as an equity issue?
Sure. Well, I think, everyone's having to make adjustments and get innovative in terms of how we solve for some of the problems that have been highlighted through the pandemic, through social distancing and quarantine and all of those pieces. I think everyone is being impacted in different ways. But as it relates to mobility access and equity and all of those interrelated issues, I think for public transit, obviously they're limited in capacity that they can have on board, and new measures are related to sanitation and things of that nature. And so they're needing to look at operationally and from a service delivery standpoint, what does that look like currently, and what is that going to look like emerging from the pandemic? And some of that is how are different services going to be offered. So for example, DART is providing meal delivery services for seniors and also for students, and providing kind of that mobile delivery of food is a way that they're adapting and being of service, in the midst of all these other changes. But as it relates to equity, there are neighborhoods in South and Southern Dallas where 50% of the population are transit dependent. And so if you look at disruption in service, especially if they're considered essential employees and still need to go to work, you're looking at additional challenges to retaining jobs. Obviously, concerns over, are they safe? Do they have the PPE that they need? And so you're just really looking at what was already a challenge from an equity perspective, and in some cases putting it on steroids, which is where a lot of the collaborations that are taking place between the private sector and automakers, as an example, and other agencies are so critical to being able to succeed in bridging the divide during this crisis and after.
So I know that mobility is one area that you're looking at public service and equity, but you're also looking at public service and equity through the lens of broadband access and telehealth. What is DIA doing to look at that intersection between broadband access and telehealth during the pandemic?
Sure. So there's a lot of ideas and conversations happening, again, cross-sector, and obviously the hospital systems and the county are all looking at how do we serve health needs, not just related to COVID, but general health needs and illness and preventative and things that don't stop. And so one of the conversations is, how do we co-locate and provide services in areas that are related to health deserts, as an example, where it's not easy to access these facilities, or certainly if some of them have been shut down from a safety perspective or isolated to treating COVID cases, how do we make sure that everyone is served? And telehealth is a really natural service provision for that, or looking at those ways. So if you look at facilities that may not traditionally offer healthcare or may not offer telehealth currently, are those spaces ones that could be converted in a safe way and in an effective way to reach that population that really needs those services and may be limited by mobility? However, in looking at the digital divide or looking at broadband access in general, telehealth really requires high-speed internet connection. So as we look at that cross-section between health access and broadband access, you have to kind of make sure that both are in place in order to be effective. So how do we look at public facilities that are already wired and using those as kind of a launch pad and kind of going from there and working out? But again, there's a lot of really amazing agencies that are looking at how we solve for this together.
When you're working with, the broadband side and the health providers, there's a lot of different parties involved, and I'm sure a lot of different partnerships that have to happen. Can you talk a little bit about some of those partnerships?
For sure. And that's one of the really exciting things that's happening right now, is watching these conversations really accelerate. So if you look at entities like the city of Dallas and lighting up all of their public facilities and increasing fiber access, if you're looking at DISD announced a major initiative last week called Operation Connectivity, which says in a really short order, every student in DISD is going to have high-speed access in the home, which is which is a huge stake in the ground to put forward, and I think a really visionary, and you have to have an entity that's willing to step up. But to get that done, there obviously are a ton of different entities that have to be involved. It's too big of an issue for DISD to handle alone, for example. And so there's convenings of the CTOs of dozens of school districts and other agencies coming together to look at how do we solve this together and create a really, what are the short, mid, and long-term strategies for that. The county is looking at this as well. The Chamber of Commerce's workforce development, City of Dallas, we're part of those conversations, and many, many others. And so again, when you look at, okay, short term, it's about hotspots, right? But that's not going to solve the long-term problem. How do we create and expand Wi-Fi networks that these entities already have and turn them outward into other neighborhoods? When you work with folks in the private sector like AT&T and T-Mobile and Verizon, who have created these, discounted or free plans at a minimum for 2 to 3 months, and how do we look at making sure that internet is accessible from it being available, affordable, and knowing how to use it. And so all of these entities are coming together because of, one, the scope of the need. Dallas is a massive area geographically. Two, financially, that's always the biggest barrier, into these major initiatives happening. So just really thrilled everyone's coming together and having those conversations in an integrated way. And I think that can really happen.
It seems like, I would imagine when you're dealing with such like an extensive ecosystem, it's hard to determine who does what and how much of what happens. So can you kind of talk about some of the challenges that you guys have faced in working across such a wide variety of partners and stakeholders and some of these digital divide telehealth issues?
Sure. Well, I think, because we're so in the middle of it right now, first, an example of us convening in the past over other issues, the DIA has about 3 dozen partner organizations, and all of them work together on our first set of projects, which was the Living Lab that is, 10 projects in a 6-block corridor. But when you have 3 dozen organizations, we worked with 20 departments at the City of Dallas. How do you convene in a way where everyone kind of picks their slice that's the highest and best use of their talents to come together to put a really complex project together? And I think that's one of the most important things when you're looking at partnerships related to such a meaty issue like the digital divide is really to say, and we've worked with the Federal Reserve Bank quite a bit in looking at this issue and leveraging the subject matter experts that they have. I think y'all know Jordana Barton at the Fed, I joke, she's like my Yoda as it relates to digital divide and things like that. But really just saying that you can't point a finger at one entity as this is why this is a problem, and you can't point the finger at one entity in terms of it's your job to solve this whole thing, right? So if we look at, philanthropy and public sector and private sector and civic entities and whatnot, everybody needs to figure out what is the highest and best use of my organization and my resources, and then how do we figure out how they all fit together? So a lot of that is convening and just really understanding what do each of us have to offer, and not take on more than makes sense, but having a convening body that can kind of help wrangle and keep all the pieces moving forward in parallel.
And when it comes to figuring out, whose role is what, there's so many different roles, like you said. And so what can private companies, what role can they play? The governments are constantly having budget cuts and can't cover everything. So what role can they play, and have you seen them sort of stepping up during this time?
100%. And again, I think as the providers that are already on the ground, a lot of it has been the provision of these hotspots, the discounting of these plans, and just really making sure that in the near term, those gaps are closed, and how do we then look at long-term strategies. And I think what the private sector brings to bear at the highest level is their subject matter expertise. They've built these all over the world. Some countries have more successfully kind of solved this problem at scale, right? And so how do they bring those lessons learned together, and how do they help look at financial models? Because putting these deals together is certainly something that they're very familiar with, and there's new financial models that we can pull in and take a look at that. But I think the expertise in community investment from the standpoint of internal foundations, understanding how these networks can be built, and what can they look at in terms of helping solve for that financial gap, there's a big part to play.
So Jennifer, I think one of the most important things right now is to start moving conversations away from just like what's happening with COVID right now and moving them more towards how can we take what we've learned right now and use it in the future. So what do you think the long-term effects will be for this conversation around public space and telehealth, given what we're learning right now in the current pandemic?
No, I think absolutely. And it's kind of the difference between, a Band-Aid solution and looking at a long-term permanent one. And so I think the issues that have been flagged and really had a spotlight put on them, and especially the ones that you've referenced, are the ones that now have a springboard to go the distance from a larger strategic perspective. But I think as we emerge from this, it really speaks to resiliency planning and looking at, one, when these kind of crisis or shock points happen again, being more prepared, but also looking at what are the underlying systemic challenges that have caused these gaps to exist and have spotlights put on them. And I think one of the really interesting ways that we hope this can get approached is through an initiative that we're launching called the North Texas Innovation Alliance, which is obviously regional in nature, covers the whole DFW North Texas region and dozens of cities and counties and agencies. But in those convenings, which in a timely manner have kind of started falling around the time of COVID, there's that ability for them to share lessons learned and ask really candid questions. How are you handling this? How are you looking at emerging from this? And so you have that kind of immediate collaboration, but really looking at, we all know that we're going to have 10, 20, we don't know what percentage budget loss is going to come out of this, as a result of this, but how are you all going to deal with that? How are we going to handle efficiencies? And are there ways that we can work together as a region from a buying perspective or a budget perspective to get done what we all need to get done by kind of pooling efforts, pooling resources? And I think that's the way that we're going to be able to kind of, again, take a really, really traumatic and unfortunate situation and potentially have that be something that can really provide stability and access and opportunity moving forward, that really prepares the city and the region and the state. I love how we can all call upon each other and really just get real with each other and try and take successes and not repeat mistakes. I'm always happy to talk about that too. It's really important.
Yeah, I think a lot of cities have shown a lot of leadership throughout this whole thing. It's sort of fallen onto local governments and regional partnerships to really take action. That's been really nice to see. And I got to listen in on a call with you and leaders from Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, Houston. So it's really great to see the big cities in Texas coming together on this too.
And it's so awesome. And I think, Governor Abbott's office joining this Operation Connectivity is a huge piece too, in terms of can we leverage state resources? And, to your point, often it falls locally, but if everybody is united again around a North Star, things are all really possible. And what other cities are doing, we're about to launch a fleet of mobile learning labs that provide connectivity in the 10 most underconnected neighborhoods in Dallas as it relates to kids and providing those services and combinations there. San Antonio's doing that. I know we mentioned that. And other areas are trying different things related to libraries and other customs. So again, it's how do we knit together the learnings, and are there ways to scale even beyond regional, but really looking at how do we connect dots to serve rural communities as well as cities. Again, we all got to do it together, and unfortunately, crisis often creates the urgency to do things better and differently. So,
well, thank you, Jen, for taking some time to talk with us. It's really, again, like Erin said, it's really interesting to see how cities are leading a lot of these projects, and really encouraging to see how your organization is really helping the city of Dallas figure out how to create a more equitable space to live in for a lot of the different types of communities that exist within the Dallas area. I'm a Dallasite myself, so I really understand how a lot of different pieces and different types of people and cultures exist within that community, and it's important to make sure that everybody continues to move forward. So thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me, and we'll keep going on the journey together. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you.